Welcome. I am a lay Shin Buddhist who nevertheless maintains an interest in the broader realm of Pure Land and Mahayana Buddhist teachings. My YouTube channel is called Akala Akala, that is A-C-A-L-A, A-C-A-L-A. In these podcasts, I make a non-scholarly, humble, and sometimes bumbling attempt to explore a particular topic or question related to the wonderful Buddha Dharma. I hope you find them to be of interest. With that said, let us begin. So, Article 2 of Reverend Suji's Profession of Faith is a tough one to swallow. He says, "We feel deeply that our hearts are dark with ignorance and passions, that even our good acts are tainted with the poison of selfishness, and that by ourselves we are incapable of true goodness." Now, this kind of notion runs counter to a lot of what we like to think, namely, we like to build ourselves up. We like to enhance our sense of ego. And as a psychologist or a retired psychologist, I can say ego strength is important in early developmental stages. We don't want young people to, be so down on themselves that they get depressed or feel worthless. So, having ego strength at a certain stage of life is a positive as far as I'm concerned. But at some point in our life, if we are to pursue this wisdom, this sense of seeing reality in a clearer way, in a deeper way, what we have to acknowledge is that when we really look at ourselves, that there is a profound egoism or egotism associated with our various activities and thoughts and feelings. We want to look good. We want to perceive ourselves as being good. And we may do many good things. As it says here, good acts. There may be good acts. But even in those good acts, if we look deeply enough, there often is a sense of contrivance to look good in the eyes of others or build up our reputation or to be perceived again as a good person per se. And this is not to say that we're not a good person. That's an overly simplistic way of experiencing this. What it's to say is that if we really are honest and we really, as it says, feel deeply in our hearts as to what's going on there, we have to recognize two things. One, that we're basically ignorant in the sense of what we know about the true nature of reality, which is non-dual, which is characterized by a mysterious sense of interconnectedness that we typically are not in touch with. And we have to acknowledge passions, both in terms of, again, the two poisons of lust, where there are things we want and we want to draw them toward us, as well as aversions in terms of anger or hatred or even mild aversion to things that we want to push away from us, whether that be people or experiences or losses that we may have had, etc. So Reverend Suji goes on in this article too to say, in terms of the nature of life, when we honestly look into the depths of our hearts, we see that all our thoughts, acts, and words are motivated by egocentricity, whether it be plain self-preservation or happiness for others or self. Even altruistic acts are still relative. We are incapable of true absolute goodness because the very nature of life itself is finite, limited, and imperfect. So however you want to think about this, if you want to think about it in terms of the nature of life or in terms of, as I in some sense prefer, sort of the nature of our Homo sapiens being, the nature of our organism, and the nature of ourselves is to orient ourselves toward these things that he's talking about, self-preservation and happiness. And there's nothing, again, wrong with that per se, but we have to acknowledge that that is inconsistent with the contrast that we can see when we think about the perfection of Amida Buddha, the perfection of the Bodhisattva ideal, who really is acting and functioning in a way that is totally altruistic in the sense of working on behalf of the benefit of others purely and simply, rather than operating on the basis of his or her own self-interest. And that's the sense in which, if we see that we are incapable of true goodness, of perfect altruism, then we see the contrast between ourselves and Amida, and we see that it is important, in order to attain some kind of self-realization or enlightenment, that we have to rely upon the power of his vow. We have to rely on other power rather than on self-power. We have to travel the easy path rather than the path of sages. And, sometimes, and in fact very often probably, a person, even if they're a seeker, even if they wish to attain enlightenment of some kind, they have to, and I had to, pursue a difficult path to the point where you realize that it's impossible to fulfill in a perfect way. So again, there's nothing wrong with pursuing that path, and it's a very wonderful path for those who can tread it. But at some point, one realizes that you can't be perfect, is what it boils down to. None of us is perfect. But back to the more superficial level, we want to see ourselves in a light that reflects upon us in a positive way, both in terms of how we see ourselves and in terms of how others see us. It's interesting. I think it was Zaporin who teaches us many things about the Tiantai school of Buddhism, who talked about death. And he made reference to the fact, as I recall, that the scariest thing about death is that we no longer have control over our own image. That we work pretty hard to have this image. We build up our vitae or our resume. If we have professional degrees, we may put our various sheepskins on the wall to document our accomplishments. And of course, we generally portray ourselves in a positive light as we describe ourselves to other people within our various encounters in the world. And that's okay too. Again, that's okay. That's natural within the sort of mundane operation of how we function on a day-to-day basis in the world. But if we want to really dig deeper, if we really want to see the truth about who we are, we need to step back and be honest with ourselves. Now, I'm not going to sit here in front of this microphone and share with you all of my faults. And in fact, I would like for you to see me in a positive light. But, within my own heart, I know who I am. I know what my faults are. I know the ways in which I'm imperfect. And I suspect that any of you who really sits down and looks within yourself can find the same. Shinran himself, the founder of Shin Buddhism, or Jodo Shinshu, at the very end, the last thing he wrote in his Shozomatsu Wasen, his gathas that he wrote, I believe, when he was about 85 years old. At the very end, if you look at those phrases that he wrote, let me go ahead and get a copy of it, and I'll read it to you right now to show what Shinran said. And Shinran, according to most people, is a saint. He was a saint, clearly. He was at least a bodhisattva, if not an incarnation of a Buddha in Nirmanakaya form. But let me read to you what he wrote at the end of his life. This was his final wasen, his final verse that he wrote. And I'll give you two versions of it. He said, "I do not know right from wrong, nor am I able to distinguish truth from falsity, though I lack even a morsel of mercy and compassion. For name and fortune, I desire to be a teacher of others." And here's a version that's a slightly different translation. He says, "Though I pretend to be wise and good, I do not truly know what is right and what is wrong. I cannot distinguish the true from the false. Yet, even though I have no feelings of mercy and compassion, seeking name and fortune, I desire to be a teacher of others." So he acknowledges here that, what his limitations are, and yet what his aspirations are, and he wants to tell us in plain language that don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. He has limitations. His heart is dark with ignorance and passions, even though he may come across as wise. And it harkens also to the part of the Tanisho where he says, I have no disciples. And where he says, look, if you've come all this way to learn something from me, you might as well go back to those other learned teachers, because all I know is what my teacher Honen taught me, which is to rely upon the name, Namo Amida Butsu. With that, I will sign off by reciting the Nembutsu in gratitude for being embraced and accepted just as I am by Amida Buddha, never, never to be abandoned. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.